welcome to NTD China News. I'm Karen Chang. Making headlines this Thursday, May 2nd. Protest in India against Chinese military incursion. British lawmakers briefed on forced organ harvesting in China. And the Chinese regime accuses Japan of escalating tensions in the East China Sea. Chinese and Indian officials continue their negotiations over a border conflict flare-up. But inside India, tensions are heating up, with angry protests over the movements of Chinese troops along the disputed border region called the Line of Actual Control.
Border tensions between India and China continue to flare. Shouting slogans and burning images of the communist regime's flag on Wednesday, Indian protesters rallied against what they say is the Chinese military invading Indian territory.
The people of India, we strongly condemn the China's action against the India. China enters up to 19 kilometers in the Ladakh region. So we strongly condemn the China's action against the India. And also, we also demand the UNO, United Nations organizations, to interfere in both the issues.
This is something the Chinese regime wants to avoid. It's mired in territorial conflicts with many of its neighbors. In January, the Philippines applied to the UN to resolve sovereignty disputes over the South China Sea. But China's foreign ministry condemned the idea of seeking an outside moderator. The Chinese military has also reportedly set up another camp along the disputed Line of Actual Control, or LAC. This one with a sign in English reading, "You are on Chinese side." For its part, the Chinese regime has denied there are Chinese troops in Indian territory. It claims troops were carrying out routine patrols and had not crossed the border. But these protesters don't believe it.
We want to make the public aware about the Chinese invasion. China has also set up bunkers in Tibet, and now they're entering into Indian territory. So that is why we want to make the public aware about the issue and take action, so that China doesn't enter any further in Indian territory.
China and India fought a short but bloody war in 1962 that resulted in China gaining a large portion of the territory adjacent to Ladakh. As two of Asia's biggest powers, China and India have been increasingly butting heads. Earlier today, China's foreign ministry said it was confident the conflict would be resolved quickly.
Forced organ harvesting. That's when people have their organs forcibly removed and then sold to others who need a transplant. This practice has allegedly been going on inside China, and the victims, largely prisoners of conscience, are killed in the process. This illegal organ trade was brought to the attention of the British Parliament this week, raising alarm.
British lawmakers have voiced concern over transplant abuse in China. They attended a hearing on April 29th at the UK Parliament, organised by medical advocacy group Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. Allegations that the Chinese regime kills prisoners of conscience for their organs came to light in 2006. The wife of a Chinese transplant surgeon came forward and said her husband had removed the corneas of about 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners while they were still alive.
I think it's certainly something we should look at now, because it appears that there is a loophole here. Obviously, anything forcible organ transplant, let alone the death murder of the person whose organs are being taken, would clearly be a very serious crime in the UK.
Former Canadian MP David Kilgour and investigative journalist Ethan Gutman are among those who have done extensive research into the allegations. They both believe that Chinese state hospitals, which are closely monitored by the government, have been selling these organs to rich Chinese and to foreigners. And that makes this a problem beyond just China's borders.
But if people are being able to go abroad, have the transplants from that source, whether they know that or not, frankly, and to come back to the UK, then clearly that is something that we should be interested in, because firstly it is a very serious crime. It probably is a crime against humanity. It's a form of torture.
Israel was the first country to deny medical insurance to any citizen who gets an organ from China. Governments in Australia, Taiwan and the EU are also discussing the legal policies to prevent medical tourism to China. Andy Slaughter says the UK should also consider this. The Chinese regime admits to taking organs from executed prisoners. It's now pledged to phase this practice out.
And the idea from the Chinese government that organ harvesting should be phased out is not acceptable. They know it's going on and it needs to stop. It should never have happened. And having got it stopped, the people who've been responsible for doing this need to legally be brought to account.
The Chinese regime keeps execution numbers secret, but most investigators agree that there wouldn't be enough inmates on death row to account for the 10,000 transplants done each year. Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting will next travel to Ireland for another hearing. NTD News, London.
The small chain of uninhabitable islands in the East China Sea has dragged down relations between China and Japan, with the US officially not taking sides but legally obligated to protect Japan in case of armed conflict. The Chinese regime is warning Washington to stay out of it.
China's ambassador to the United States accused Japan on Tuesday of increasing tension in the East China Sea. He says Japan is stirring up an already bitter dispute between the two countries over ownership of a group of islands. Japan said last week it would conduct military drills with the United States in June. The joint exercise will involve the recapture of an isolated island, but no specific details have been given. The Chinese ambassador reacted strongly, issuing an indirect threat to third-party countries that may become involved in the dispute, telling them not to lift up rocks for Japan and drop them on their own feet. The US has kept out of the sovereignty dispute, but under a post-World War II treaty, it recognizes Japan as having administrative rights over the island. The US is also committed under a security treaty to defend Japan if there is an attack on Japanese-administered territory. Japan's government bought the disputed islands from a private Japanese owner last year. The issue has brought Sino-Japan relations to their lowest point since normalization of relations more than 40 years ago.
And coming up after the break, Freedom House says foreign reporters are facing more harassment and violence in China. China reports its latest victim from the H7N9 bird flu virus. And there's a new ban on the Chinese military from using luxury cars. And now Chinese netizens are catching those breaking the rules. And welcome back. China has one of the most restrictive media environments in the world. The ruling Communist Party tightly controls state-run media, and according to a new press freedom report, those controls have an even wider reach to restrict reporting by foreign media.
The Chinese regime continues to maintain an iron grip on the press, according to US-based Freedom House. And it wasn't just restrictions on domestic media. Foreign reporters also faced a highly restrictive environment in China. Releasing its Freedom of the Press 2013 report on May 1st, Freedom House noted that more foreign reporters faced harassment and violent assaults in China last year.
I think the concern is Chinese government efforts to censor reporting about China beyond China's borders by journalists elsewhere.
Citing the Foreign Correspondent Club of China, the report also says 27 foreign reporters had their visas denied or delayed because of their content over the past 2 years.
It is, and obviously China has a lot of money that it uses to try to influence the licensing and other issues, as well as purchasing of media organizations, so it definitely is an issue to keep an eye on.
But overall, Freedom House actually recorded a modest improvement of press freedom in China last year because of the growth of social media. This has allowed more citizens to share information outside of traditional state-sanctioned media outlets. But media in the country under the communist regime remains not free.
So it's a bit of a mixed picture, but China continues to be a country in the not free category because of the efforts of the authorities to try to control the flow of information and to try to pressure journalists so that they're not able to do their job without restrictions.
NTD News, Washington, D.C.
A Chinese couple has been sentenced to prison by a U.S. federal judge for stealing trade secrets from automaker General Motors. Shanshan is a former engineer of General Motors. Before leaving the company in 2005, she copied thousands of documents on hybrid car technology. The trade secrets were worth $40 million. Du and her husband, Yu Qing, were planning to strike a deal with a competitor company in China. Du was sentenced to a prison term of 1 year and a day, while her husband was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Judge Marianne Bettany says although the crimes are serious, Du's health problems and the 7-year length of the case were taken into consideration. The case is one among several cases involving people of Chinese ancestry alleged of stealing trade secrets from U.S. companies. More than a dozen such theft cases were reported over the past 3 years. China has reported another death from the H7N9 bird flu virus. A 55-year-old man from central Hunan province is the latest victim. He was diagnosed with the virus last Friday. State-run Xinhua news agency reported his death today, bringing the total number of reported fatalities to 27. The man is the first to die from the virus outside of eastern China. Another man in Hunan province is infected with the virus. China has reported 127 bird flu cases so far. Xinhua says 26 people have since recovered. The anniversary of the 2008 Sichuan earthquake is coming up, and so is the memory of Xiaoren. Tong was known for his investigation into shoddy school buildings that collapsed in the 2008 quake. 5 years later, Tong is behind bars, and now fellow activists are calling for his release.
May 5th marks the 5th anniversary of the 2008 Sichuan earthquake that killed almost 90,000 people. Ahead of the anniversary, prominent activists and Chinese dissidents are calling for the release of Chinese campaigner Tan Zhuren. An open letter has been circulating online saying his charges are outrageous and calling for his immediate release. Tan called for an investigation into the collapse of school buildings that killed over 5,000 children in the 2008 earthquake. In 2010, he was officially charged with inciting state subversion for comments he made on the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre.
Tan attended humanitarian relief efforts during the Sichuan earthquake, and he revealed shoddy building constructions and looked into casualty details. This touched a nerve with the regime, so they fabricated a charge against him.
The collapse of nearly 14,000 schools when other public buildings remained standing made Tan suspicious. He called for a formal investigation into the tofu buildings, which he suspected collapsed because of shoddy construction and corruption.
What Tan did was justice. He isn't guilty of any crimes. So we think the government just framed him, and they're suppressing the conscience of the public and ruining the country's morals. So we are asking for Mr. Tang Zuoren to be released.
Some also believe that Tan's charges were an effort to silence the vocal activists who had stood up to the government for years. They say the Chinese regime is sending a clear signal that citizens should not expose government corruption.
If people who expose the truth of what happens are politically persecuted, and people don't call for their freedom, there will be less and less people who dare to expose the truth, and corruption will become even more rampant.
Tan was given a 5-year sentence in 2010. In 2008, Huang Qi, another activist also called for an investigation in shoddy school construction, was given a 5-year sentence for the same charge.
And on a lighter note, we reported the other day that the Chinese regime started a crackdown on military license plates on luxury cars. That includes prestigious brands like Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Bentley, Jaguar and Porsche. The ban was part of a publicity facelift for the Communist Party to boost its image. The military plates have been a hot commodity. Hang one on your car and you're exempt from paying tolls, parking fees, and even speeding tickets. Now the government is replacing all military license plates in the hope that it can better regulate them. The law went into effect yesterday, and already Chinese netizens are catching those breaking the rules. On the very first day, people have snatched pictures of luxury cars sporting a military plate. This picture has been reposted 15,000 times already. Under the new law, cars with an engine capacity of 3 liters or more, or ones that cost over 450,000 yuan, about $72,000, cannot carry a military license plate. And that's all for this broadcast of NTD China News. For more of our China content, visit our website at ntd.tv or subscribe to our YouTube channel, NTD on China. Coming up next is China Focus with Shelley Zhang. She speaks with Freedom House's Sarah Cook about the latest press freedom report. Stay tuned.